The morning I found out I was pregnant, I sat on the cold bathroom tile for a long time before I let myself smile. I had taken 3 tests. All 3 said the same thing. I kept turning them over in my hands like they might change their minds if I stared long enough. My husband and I had been trying for 14 months. 14 months of tracking cycles and taking supplements and pretending not to be devastated every time my period arrived right on schedule. 14 months of my mother-in-law asking pointed questions at Sunday dinners about whether we had considered seeing a specialist with that particular smile of hers that never quite reached her eyes. I was 31 years old. I was a licensed pharmacist with 8 years of clinical experience and a reputation for being the most detail-oriented person in any room I entered. I owned a small condo before I married my husband, drove a car I had paid off myself, and had a savings account that would have made my younger self cry with relief. I had built everything I owned from the ground up because I grew up understanding that no one was coming to rescue me. My mother worked double shifts at a hotel laundry for most of my childhood. My father left when I was 4. Security was something you constructed with your own hands or you went without it entirely. My husband came from a very different world. His family had money, the way some families have furniture, so much of it, accumulated over so many generations, that they had stopped noticing it was there. His grandfather had built a regional pharmaceutical distribution company from nothing, which I always found quietly ironic given my own career. When his grandfather passed away 3 years before I came into the picture, he left behind a trust valued at close to $8 million. The terms of the trust were specific. My husband would receive full control of the principal on his 35th birthday, but only if he was married and had at least one biological child by that date. His 35th birthday was 14 months away from the morning I sat on that bathroom tile. I want to be clear about something before I go any further, because I know how this sounds. I did not marry my husband for his grandfather's money. I married him because he was genuinely kind in a way that felt rare, because he made me laugh harder than anyone I had ever met, and because for the first 2 years of our relationship he treated me like I was the most important person in any room we entered together. I loved him. That love was real even if almost everything that came after it was not. My mother-in-law was a different matter entirely. She had never liked me. I understood this from our very first meeting. A stiff dinner at her home where she served a meal I was allergic to and then acted wounded when I barely touched my plate. She was a woman who had spent 30 years being the most important woman in her son's life, and my arrival had disrupted that arrangement in a way she found personally offensive. She was gracious enough in public, all warm smiles and compliments about my hair or my outfit, but in private she had a gift for small cruelties delivered with plausible deniability. A comment about how I had gained a little weight, framed as concern. A story told at dinner about a friend's daughter who had gone back to school for a more advanced degree, told while looking directly at me. A habit of calling my husband by his childhood nickname in a way that subtly reminded everyone present that she had known him far longer and far more intimately than I ever would. I had installed a small security camera in the entrance hallway of our home 8 months into our marriage. I told my husband it was for package theft, which was true enough. Our neighborhood had a problem. What I did not tell him was that I had started to notice things going missing after his mother visited. Small things. A bracelet my mother had given me. A bottle of perfume I had bought in Paris on a work trip. Nothing I could prove. Nothing worth starting a war over. But I had learned early in life that the best way to protect yourself was to see clearly, and I intended to see clearly. I was 6 weeks pregnant when I finally told my husband. We cried together in our kitchen at 11 o'clock at night with the overhead light on and takeout containers still on the counter, and it was one of the most genuinely happy moments of my adult life. He wanted to tell everyone immediately. I asked him to wait until 12 weeks, until we had seen the heartbeat, until I felt safe enough to breathe. He agreed, and for those 6 weeks, the secret felt like something precious and private that belonged only to us. Then his mother called on a Sunday afternoon while we were both home, and my husband answered on speaker without thinking, and she heard something in his voice. She arrived at our house 40 minutes later without calling ahead. I was in the kitchen when she walked in. My husband had clearly told her in the driveway because she came through the door already crying, already reaching for me with both arms, already performing a version of joy so enthusiastic it felt like a hostage situation. I let her hug me. I smiled. I said all the right things. And I watched her eyes over my husband's shoulder during that hug, and what I saw there was not happiness. It was calculation. The next few weeks felt almost normal on the surface. My mother-in-law began calling more frequently, dropping by with food, offering to help us research pediatricians and doulas and prenatal vitamins. She was present in a way she had never been present before, and my husband was visibly moved by what he interpreted as her finally accepting me into the family. I accepted the food she brought graciously. I ate none of it. I want to explain that clearly because I know it sounds paranoid. I was a pharmacist. I understood what certain compounds could do to a pregnancy in its early weeks. I understood that my mother-in-law had both the intelligence and the motivation to know the same things. I was not willing to stake my child's life on the assumption that a woman who had stolen my bracelet and made pointed comments about my education would draw a firm moral line at something far worse. So I thanked her. I set the food aside, and I ordered delivery. My husband never noticed. He had never noticed much of anything about his mother that I had not pointed out to him directly, and even then, his first instinct was always to find an alternative explanation. At 11 weeks, 3 days before my first trimester screening, I came home from a closing shift to find my mother-in-law sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of tea and a small glass of what she described as fresh-pressed ginger juice that she had made specifically for my nausea. My husband was beside her, smiling, clearly proud of her thoughtfulness. She pushed the glass toward me with both hands and watched me with an expression of such careful attentiveness that every instinct I possessed told me not to touch it. I said I was not feeling well enough to drink anything. She insisted, gently, the way someone insists when refusal is not really an option they are offering. My husband looked at me with that particular expression he wore when he wanted me to simply go along with something to keep the peace. I picked up the glass. I brought it to my lips. I did not drink. I set it back down and excused myself to use the bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the tub for 10 minutes, running through what I knew and what I suspected and what I was willing to do about it. The next morning I took the glass, which I had quietly transferred to a sealed container the previous night, to a colleague at the hospital-adjacent lab where I occasionally consulted. I told her I suspected contamination and asked her to run a broad panel without asking questions. She owed me a favor, and she did not ask questions. She called me back in 36 hours. The juice had contained blue cohosh and pennyroyal in concentrations high enough to cause significant complications in an early pregnancy. Both are herbal compounds. Both are difficult to trace if you do not know to look for them specifically. Both can be purchased legally and without much difficulty if you know where to look. Neither would have appeared in a standard tox screen unless a clinician had specific reason to suspect them. I sat in my car in the pharmacy parking lot for a very long time after that call. I did not cry. I had spent enough of my life learning not to waste my energy on shock when the evidence had been pointing in one direction for months. What I felt instead was something quieter and far more dangerous than tears. It was the specific, settled clarity of a person who understands exactly what they are dealing with and has decided precisely what to do about it. I did not go to my husband first. I want to be honest about that, because I have thought about it many times since, and I still believe I made the right choice. I had watched my husband rationalize his mother's behavior for 3 years. I had watched him explain away, minimize, and reinterpret every uncomfortable truth I had ever placed in front of him, not out of malice but out of a kind of willful tenderness toward her that he had never been able to fully examine. If I went to him with a lab report and told him his mother had tried to harm our child, his first instinct would be to doubt the lab report. I needed something he could not rationalize away. I called my doctor that afternoon and told her I needed to move my screening appointment up. She fit me in the following morning. Everything was fine. The heartbeat was strong and steady, and the ultrasound technician printed me a small black and white photograph that I folded carefully and put in the inside pocket of my work bag. Then I went home and I reviewed every minute of footage my hallway camera had captured over the previous 3 months. There were 11 separate visits from my mother-in-law in the footage. On 7 of them, she had been alone in the front of the house for at least a few minutes, either arriving before my husband came downstairs or waiting after he stepped away. On the most recent visit, 3 days before the ginger juice incident, I watched her spend 4 uninterrupted minutes in the hallway closet, where we kept extra pantry supplies, including several herbal teas I had not thought to examine closely. I photographed the closet that evening. I pulled every tea box and checked every container. One of the teas, a chamomile blend I had bought at a farmer's market, had been resealed with fresh tape along the bottom. I did not touch it with my bare hands. I called my colleague again. I asked for one more favor. The results came back the same day as my call with the attorney I had quietly retained the previous week. A family law specialist who had been recommended to me by a friend who had navigated her own divorce with exceptional outcomes. I told him everything from the beginning. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very calmly, that I had more documentation than most people in my situation had, and that I should move carefully and stop telling my husband anything I was not prepared to have reported back to his mother. That last part did not surprise me as much as it probably should have. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I kept everything on a personal laptop my husband did not know existed, purchased with cash, and kept in a locked box at my office. I transferred enough of my own savings to cover 6 months of expenses independently. I quietly moved the items of personal and sentimental value from our shared home to my office. A few things at a time, nothing noticeable. I kept my demeanor at home perfectly steady. I went to Sunday dinners. I laughed at the appropriate moments. I let my mother-in-law refill my water glass and thanked her warmly and drank nothing. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not the one I had planned. My husband called me at work on a Thursday afternoon and asked me to come home early. His voice had a particular tightness in it that I recognized as the tone he used when he was managing something he did not want to manage. When I walked through the door, his mother was sitting on our couch. His sister was sitting beside her. They had both arrived in the middle of the afternoon on a weekday, which meant this had been arranged. His mother looked at me with an expression I can only describe as composed regret, the face of a person who has rehearsed delivering bad news. She told me she needed to speak to me about something she had been struggling with for weeks. She said she had not wanted to interfere, but that she felt it was her responsibility as a mother. Then she told my husband that she did not believe I was actually pregnant. She said it carefully, with pauses, with the practiced hesitation of someone who has thought through how to frame a lie to make it land with maximum damage. She said she had noticed I was not showing the way she had expected. She said she had a friend who had worked in a fertility clinic who had told her that certain women fabricate pregnancies to secure financial situations in marriages. She said she was not accusing me of anything. She was simply expressing her concern, out of love for her son. My sister-in-law produced a printed document she claimed was a private investigator's report suggesting I had not registered at any local OB practice. I looked at my husband. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the floor. I reached into the inside pocket of my work bag and I set the ultrasound photograph on the coffee table between us. Then I set my phone beside it, open to the voice memo I had started recording the moment I walked through the front door. Then I opened my laptop, which I had brought with me because I had learned to carry it, and I turned it to face the room and I played 45 seconds of hallway camera footage showing my mother-in-law alone in our entry closet, 3 days before the ginger juice, doing something with a tea box at the back of the shelf. The room went very quiet. My mother-in-law's composure held for approximately 4 seconds. Then she said the footage was edited. Then she said I was confused about the date. Then she said she had simply been looking for something in the closet, and I was deliberately misrepresenting an innocent action. Her voice remained steady, but her hands, clasped together in her lap, had gone rigid in a way I noticed because I had been watching her hands for 3 years. I told her that the tea box had been tested at a certified laboratory, and the results were documented and already in my attorney's possession. I set the lab report on the table beside the ultrasound photograph. My sister-in-law stood up very fast and said something I could not entirely follow about family loyalty and about how I had always been trying to isolate my husband. My mother-in-law put a hand on her arm, and then my mother-in-law looked at me with an expression that dropped all the pretense entirely, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see exactly what had been behind the warm smiles and refilled water glasses for 3 years. My husband did not say anything for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He asked his mother if any of it was true. She did not answer him directly. She said that everything she had ever done was for him. She said that the trust required a child, and I had taken 14 months to produce one, and she had simply been trying to protect the family's interests. She said it so straightforwardly, so matter-of-factly, as if the logic of it was self-evident, as if the clause in a trust document was a reasonable justification for what she had put in that glass. My husband looked like a man watching a building he had lived in his entire life quietly collapse. I told him I was sorry. I meant it. In the particular way you can mean something and still know with complete certainty that it changes nothing about what you have to do. The police report was filed that evening. My attorney had a contact in the county prosecutor's office, and the lab documentation was thorough enough that the investigation moved with a speed I had not expected. My mother-in-law's search history, accessed through a subsequent warrant, included queries about herbal compounds and early pregnancy that dated back to the week after we told her I was expecting. She was charged 6 weeks later. The sister-in-law had apparently known enough that she was interviewed twice, though she was ultimately not charged. My husband retained his own attorney, separate from his mother's defense, which struck me at the time as an act of self-preservation that arrived several years too late to matter. I had already moved out by then, quietly, efficiently, with the same planning I had applied to every other stage of this. My attorney had advised that leaving the marital home could complicate certain proceedings, and I had weighed that advice carefully and decided that my mental health and my child's safety were worth more than any legal tactical advantage. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from my pharmacy. I repainted the second bedroom a soft sage green on a Saturday in my second trimester with my mother helping me, the two of us eating takeout Thai on the floor and listening to old Motown records on a portable speaker, and it was one of the better days of my adult life. My daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, and she had her great-grandmother's nose, and absolutely nobody else's features that I could identify, which I found privately amusing. She came into the world screaming at a volume that struck the delivery nurses as impressive for someone her size, and I thought, good. She has already figured out the most important thing. She knows her voice is supposed to carry. My mother-in-law pleaded no contest 14 months after her arrest. She received a suspended sentence, substantial community service hours, a permanent restraining order that covered me and my daughter, and the complete and rather spectacular dissolution of the social standing she had spent 30 years carefully constructing. The trust, as it turned out, had a morality clause buried in its secondary provisions that her attorney apparently failed to flag until it was far too late. My ex-husband received a partial disbursement. He did not receive the full amount his grandfather had intended. He lives about 40 minutes away from our daughter and sees her on alternate weekends and some holidays. And he is, by all accounts, working through what happened in therapy with sincere effort. I do not have space in my current life to be angry at him anymore. What I have instead is a clear-eyed understanding that love does not excuse the years of choosing comfort over clarity, and that understanding protects me far better than anger ever could. I was promoted to Director of Clinical Pharmacy Operations at my hospital system the spring after my daughter turned 1. I manage a team of 23 pharmacists across 4 locations. I bought a house with a yard large enough for a swing set in a neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who wave to each other in the mornings. I planted a vegetable garden in the back that produces, with more enthusiasm than I frankly expected, an extraordinary quantity of tomatoes every August. People ask me sometimes if I am angry. They mean it as a sympathetic question, and I try to receive it that way. But the honest answer is that I moved through anger a long time ago and came out the other side into something that functions more like precision. I see things clearly now in a way I did not before, or perhaps more accurately, I act on what I see in a way I did not permit myself to before. I stopped being polite at the expense of being safe. I stopped softening my observations to protect people from their own choices. I stopped mistaking a shared last name or a shared dinner table for a reason to endure harm in silence. Toxic family does not announce itself. It does not arrive wearing a villain's costume. It arrives with casserole dishes and well-meaning advice and a smile that costs it absolutely nothing because the smile is not connected to anything true underneath. It arrives knowing exactly which version of love will disarm you. It counts on the fact that you have been raised to believe that difficult family is better than no family. that conflict is a character flaw, that loyalty to blood is a virtue even when the blood is actively trying to damage you. My daughter is 2.5 years old now. She calls tomatoes, red balls, and has opinions about which shoes she is willing to wear that she expresses at considerable volume and at all hours. She does not know the story I have told you today, and she will not know it until she is old enough to hold it without it becoming something she carries instead of something she understands. What she knows right now is that the people in her house are safe, that her grandmother comes on Sundays and brings pastries and teaches her old card games with too many rules, that her mother will always, without exception, come when she calls. That knowledge is the only inheritance that was ever worth protecting. I will tell you what I tell the younger pharmacists I mentor when they ask how I make decisions under pressure. I tell them that your best instrument is always the evidence in front of you, not the story you wish were true. I spent 3 years looking at the evidence and choosing the story I wished were true, and I will not do that again. Not for a marriage, not for a family, not for a trust fund, not for anything. What you see is what you have to work with. The sooner you are honest about what you see, the sooner you can build something real from it. My daughter handed me a plastic strawberry from her play kitchen this morning, with the gravity of someone presenting a gift of enormous significance. I accepted it accordingly. I held it with both hands and told her thank you very seriously. She nodded once, satisfied, and returned to her work. I kept the plastic strawberry on my desk for the rest of the day. That is what actual wealth feels like. It is not complicated to describe, but it is very hard to arrive at. It costs something significant to get here, and I would not recommend the specific route I took, but I also cannot pretend it led anywhere other than exactly where I needed to be. If you are sitting somewhere right now, in a version of the life I used to have, receiving food you are afraid to eat, smiling at a table full of people who are counting your losses more carefully than you are, I want you to know that leaving is not failure. It is not coldness. It is not selfishness. It is the decision to stop subsidizing your own suffering with the currency of your silence. It is the hardest and the most worthwhile thing I have ever done, and the view from the other side of it is something I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for. You do not have to wait until someone forces your hand. You do not have to wait for a lab report or a voice memo or a moment of collapse to give yourself permission to be honest about what you see. Start from where you are. See clearly. Build accordingly. That is all I know, and so far it has been more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I would genuinely love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? What made you finally decide that you were worth protecting? If what I shared today meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Mending Stories for more. We are here every week, telling the truth about what it costs and what it builds. Your peace is not a luxury, it is the foundation. Protect it like your life depends on it, because in ways that matter more than you might realize right now, it does.